It's a high-tech conversation.
And a low-tech topic.
Live on the World Wide Web via Zoom. Bench Talk 101.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Bench Talk 101. This week, we're joined by Amy Harrington McAuley, who's going to talk to us about the art of historical building conservation. So I'm going to pass over to Jim, who's going to introduce Amy.
Thanks very much, Shrenik, and welcome to Bench Talk, Amy. As you can see, we're a bunch of reprobates here. I've known Amy for quite a while now. She's been over to visit me in the UK, and we've taken her around, myself and a few other cohorts, to show her the delights of boot fairs, which of course they don't have anywhere else on the planet. And she's managed to go away with quite a collection of tools, which she now uses. And for those of you who don't know Amy, I think it's very few of you on this meeting, I'll just give you a brief rundown on her achievements. She's currently preservation joiner at the George Washington's Mount Vernon estate, which is a really prestigious position. Before this, she ran her own business, which is called Oculus Fine Carpentry, and many projects she was contracted for over that period from about 2002 onwards. There were quite a few notable projects, obviously including George Washington's estate, but including also places like the North Head Lighthouse in Washington State. Now, you'll have to help me with this, Amy. Yaquina Head Lighthouse in Oregon, is that correct?
We pronounce it Hesea.
Hasia, there you go. I knew it wouldn't be right. She's got a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Oregon. Has done a baccalaureate work in architecture as well in Portland State University. She's also done work in historic archaeology at the University of Leicester. And it's a shame that Leicestershire, it's a shame that Sarah and Bill are not here because they're right there where that is. And also English building history at the University of York. She was awarded a fellowship in 2018 from the Winterthur Museum. Is that right?
Winterthur
Museum and Library to study 18th century door construction techniques and tools. And of course, that's very, very specifically relevant to the work she's doing at the moment. I, as I say, known Amy for quite some time, and she's offered to come on to speak to us tonight with a rundown on some of her work. So without further ado, over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've wanted to come on for a bit and was excited to get the invite from Jim. I didn't realize you were also rowdy. So I've just gotten off work and had a bit of my hot toddy here. So we'll get started. I'm going to share my screen now. So as Jim has alluded to, I owned a business for quite a while. I'm actually older than I look. People tell me I have a baby face. I had a business for over 20 years working on historic buildings in the Pacific Northwest before I eventually joined the team here in Virginia at George Washington's Mount Vernon. Now, some of you know Roy Underhill. He's a good friend of mine, and he has his iconic hat and suspenders. And I would say if there's any apparel that defines me, it is my boots, which are White's boots. They're made in Spokane, Washington, specifically for loggers and people that work in the forest. And my father and my grandfather wore these boots. And so hence why we have the very first slide here showing my boots. So if you ever run across anyone wearing these boots, you might look up and see my face. Uh-oh. Hold on a second here. Technology issues. Hold on. Hold on. Okay, here we go. Can everyone see the structure? Okay. So my journey was a crooked path to where I am now. As Jim said, I have an art degree from the University of Oregon, and I really didn't want to own a business when I first started out, but the way life is, I finally ended up having a business, doing something that I really love doing, and that's restoring historic sash and doors. This was my very first project in a very historic house in the Pacific Northwest. And it was the first time where I worked with a nonprofit. They had grant money. It became complicated. Lots of people wanted to make decisions, etc. And as you can see, some of these windows here needed to be replaced with ones that were more in keeping with the historic character of the house. And so me being, a novice, I went to the local window shop and asked for a bid for them to build them with machinery. And I took the bid to a meeting, and the timber framer, a good friend of mine, David Rogers, he said to me, well, really those windows should be hand built, because you are providing a product that's keeping with the character of the house, but you're also keeping a dying craft alive. So that last bit right there changed my course and my life, actually. And it's funny, when you get to a certain age, you look back at the moments when your life could have gone a very different way. And this is one of those times. So that sent me down a journey. And this little tiny tray is where I started. And you can see the old planes. And you can see about 12 years ago, I sold all my power tools except for 2, and went, I would say, 95% unplugged with a contracting business, which was crazy. And thinking back on that, with kids and bills and a house mortgage, that was crazy. I must have been out of my mind to do such a thing. But as soon as I learned how to build planes to match the profiles of the historic buildings, that's when I decided to sell everything and go unplugged. So that is the little tray that I started with way back. And that has led me to a very unique life. And I have never regretted anything that I've done. And I've worked, this is a frontier fort built in 1856, which for some of you is not very old, but for the Pacific Northwest, this is very early during the time of a lot of immigration, a lot of conflict with the native population. And I had the honor of working on this fort, which is Fort Simcoe in Washington State, which has, you're looking right there at the officers' row, which is, it's actually 5 houses, and they are built on the Andrew Downing Jackson pattern books, which is a very ornate Victorian style. And those windows are 24 light diamond casements, which were, I restored all the windows on all 5 houses, which was quite an undertaking, but definitely worthwhile. This is Fort Dalles, also of the same era, 1856-ish. And this is another frontier fort, early Pacific Northwest history. I worked on a gold dredge, which is a very curious contraption. This is actually near my hometown of Baker City, Oregon. We had a period of time of a lot of gold being discovered in the hills, and they brought in these large behemoths to dredge up gold in this valley. This one is the last one that's intact. It is now a state park, and I restored all the windows on here. And the funny story about this was, you know, as a contractor that's unplugged and kind of working on the same job site as regular contractors with their machinery and whatnot, I get a lot of stares, I get a lot of questions, sometimes ridicule, sometimes laughter. And then on this one, you know, I always get this, like, you can borrow our chop saw or table saw. We'll even bring it on the scaffold for you, but I can probably do it twice as fast as you without power. Just from setup, you know, taking it up the scaffold, you know, getting it all together. I was, you know, half done with the project by the time they got it all set up. So there is, if you are efficient with your hand tools, you can compete with modern day contractors. So as Jim mentioned, I did do a lot of lighthouses toward the end of my time in the Pacific Northwest. I worked on 7 total projects involving lighthouses. The interesting thing about the West Coast is a lot of the houses are shorter than the East Coast because they're on cliff sides. Therefore, the Fresnel lens can project out far using the cliff as height. But on the East Coast, there's not a lot of cliffs, and so they're right there on the beach, and so they have to gain height to project their light further out. This is North Head Lighthouse. It was the last lighthouse that I worked on. Very challenging. It was broken into 2 parts. One part where we restored the tower, which is here, and then the second part was doing the oil house, which is right here. And I hope everyone can see my cursor. Can you see that, Jim? Okay. So the former stewards of this house, a lighthouse, and this is common through all the lighthouses that I worked on. Instead of restoring the historic, they would brick in the windows because that's less maintenance. And so 4 watchtower windows had been bricked in. The window that was in the tower itself, 2 of the windows were bricked in. And so my job was to remove the brick, build new windows and sash, and install them. Both here, these windows were already in, you know, the openings were there, so I didn't have to do as much work on those. Lighthouses, although you might think romantic and fun to work on, are hell to work on. You're never there in the summer. You're there when there's no tourists, and it's very for wood, it's very dirty, especially if you're working around masons. You know, there was dust flying constantly. It's very dirty and gritty, and for hand tools, it was a bit of a nightmare. This is Heceta Head. I built this window, and then the other side there's a window, and then there's windows in this oil house. These little watchtower windows I restored, and this was my first real large lighthouse restoration project. This particular lighthouse is very photogenic because it's on this cliffside, and there's a road opposite it where you can get a fantastic shot. So it's very much photographed. And this is a giant Fresnel lens, a number 1, which is 8 feet tall. The previous lighthouse, the Fresnel lens had been removed and an electric light had been put in. So this beautiful Fresnel is intact and is lovely to look at. So as I alluded to, I had to learn how to build planes before I sold my power tools. And I'm sure Jim and Richard would recognize this plane as the Peacock. And if there's time after, I will tell the little tale of the Peacock. But building planes is not something that I do for sale. I don't sell them normally. I just build them as I need them. So I've built probably a dozen or more at this point. I'm currently in the process of building one for the conference at Colonial Williamsburg and another for a very large project at my work at George Washington's estate. I also do doors. This is a door for a lighthouse built entirely by hand by yours truly, way back when I was a young pup. And my shop was just my garage. You know, it was 8 feet by 17 feet, and that's what I worked out of for a very long time. And that has led me to my current place of employment, which is as preservation joiner for George Washington's Mount Vernon. They created the position for me. I'm the first woman in the history of the estate to hold such a title. It is extremely challenging. You have to bring 110% of yourself every day, 365 per year. We have very unique challenges with this property. And, you know, because of COVID, we've had some staff cuts. And so I've had to take on a bit of a managerial role currently. I now only work on the most historic sash and doors. That includes the oxeye here, this 18th century door, and it includes the Venetian window, which is around the corner here. Very challenging, very fulfilling work. There's never a dull moment, and we're often faced with very unique challenges here at this location. So I'm often asked when I give talks or talk about my life, how did you get here? How did you learn? How did you gain your skill? How did you get to be at Mount Vernon? And I tell people it's by making mistakes, essentially, and working through how to do joinery when I don't have, I think the term masterless apprentice came, there was a term bantered around a few years ago, a masterless apprentice. And, I learned just by making mistakes. And when my first project at Mount Vernon was to build some doors for the mansion, and I had to essentially reverse engineer a joint that was used, and I only had one part. And so I went down to see Roy Underhill, and he helped me figure out this elaborate coping that needed to happen on these doors. So I would say the number one thing that has taught me is my failures. And that also holds true for the Peacock plane as well. And I'm also, I do a lot of DIY. I don't have the time, money to wait for a proper forge. And so I usually use what I have. And when I fire my irons, it's just with MAP gas and some fire bricks, and away we go. And if it doesn't work, I figure something else out. And that still holds true now, even in my new bigger shop. I still don't have a forge, so away we go. Part of what I do currently involves a lot of documentation. My degree in art, which I once thought was a waste of time and money, finally has paid off with my documentation and my ability to record details, especially with sash and doors. This is crucial for doing replication at the estate, where we talk for a day on the thickness of a 1/2 inch bead. and whether it should be corked or if it should have a fillet at the bottom. The details are you have to be very exact when you're doing replication here at the estate. So not only do I manufacture new sash, I also restore existing. Again, that involves a great deal of documentation. This is the bottom sash of the Venetian, which I restored in 2018. And I will have the great privilege to build the new top sash for the Venetian this coming winter and spring. And I'm sure you'll get to see some of that on social media. So, being flexible, training up when the opportunity arises has also benefited me. My friend Susanna, who has a PhD in dendrochronology and wood identification, taught me how to do micro wood ID. And so when I do infills for repair work, matching the species is one of my top priorities. And so sometimes that involves doing micro ID. And that has served me very well at Mount Vernon. Out west, it was more like something I like to do, and I could do it. The architects and the project managers I worked with really did not care so much about, whether or not I could microscopically ID a piece of wood. But here at Mount Vernon, that skill is definitely come into play. So infill repair is a lot of what I do. And I've done that for quite a few years. When I say infill, sometimes we use the term Dutchman. If Rudy Christensen is on this lecture, know that I do not use that term. I use infill. And I think infill is a term used globally rather than Dutchman. It's just where I had to remove some historic fabric and put into place a new section of wood that matches the old. Essentially, this is a piece of brick mold off of one of the Lighthouse projects out of Doug fir. Here is another infill, and you can see the great care that that we use to match the grain orientation for each of the infills as much as possible. And we take away as little historic fabric as necessary. Historic fabric is our prime focus, restoring it, keeping it in place as much as possible. We don't use a lot of epoxies because reversibility is paramount at George Washington's estate, and epoxy is very hard to reverse. We tend to use conservation adhesives, which although laborious to manufacture, we actually have to mix it in the lab, does have 100% reversibility to it. So we're able to go back in and retreat if necessary, which is another thing that we adhere to. So the lighthouses, as I spoke, see a lot of wear and tear, and doing assessments of like sash and doors before starting, during the process. And sometimes you run across a situation where you just can't save it. This is one of the situations where, in talking with the team, we determined that this unit cannot be saved. They just don't have the money or resources to do so. You can see there's a lot of decay here that would be difficult. It runs all the way through the frame. And so the determination was to replace it. And also, I don't know if you all work with cast iron, or any sort of metal in a marine environment has troubles unless it's bronze or brass. This cast iron window pulley expanded in the salt environment and cracked the frame in two all the way around. Without proper maintenance, this is something that can occur, and I've seen it more than one time on those windows. And so manufacturing an entire new unit was part of this project. This is for the North Head Lighthouse that you saw earlier. One of the cool things that I get to do currently at George Washington's house is do a lot of in-depth research, documentation about window construction. And we have small portable microscopes that we can use that hook into our computers. And what I'm looking at here is these scallop lines, which show that this was hand coped with a gouge. And so we're always looking for signs of handwork whenever we have to restore or work on a sash. We take an opportunity to do research, which is great. Previous to this, as a contractor or a business owner, doing this kind of research is kind of on your own time. It's not something you're paid to do. You just do it because you love it. And I did it because I loved it for a very long time. And I'm very fortunate now to get paid to do this kind of research. It's one of the main benefits I see in working at this estate. This is another sash from the estate, and you can see kind of my setup. I'm not completely 100% unplugged at Mount Vernon. I do have my computer and my pocket microscope. And here I'm looking at a nail that was used to do a repair. And we analyze to the most microscopic level, especially if it concerns 18th century fabric. We're trying to determine if this nail is 18th century or if it is something that was manufactured in the 19th century. Also, more documentation. We get we get right down into the nitty gritty of sash construction and door construction, and we document everything. And that leads me to a project where we don't always use wood, which is interesting with our repairs. And we had a unique opportunity with one of the sash from an outbuilding that was eaten up by a varmint, like a squirrel, a raccoon, or some such thing. And if anyone has ever worked with a piece of wood that's been eaten by an animal, you know how ratty and jagged that can be. And so we tested using paper pulp mixed with a conservation adhesive to repair this eaten section of a window sash. The beauty of using this was that I did not have to cut into the wood whatsoever. So the previous slide, this is a mold of a section of the chewed sash. And when the paper pulp dries, it comes out looking like this here, and then it's coated with the adhesive to give it stability. You can see it here. And then it's fitted into place and adhered. And then it is filled in with more paper pulp and adhesive. And again, the beauty of this is if you put a drop of adhesive or solvent, such as ethyl alcohol or acetone, onto that, it will dissolve completely, and you can retreat with a different, if there's some sort of advanced product, or if this somehow gets damaged and you need to remove it, it completely goes back to what it was before. And this is the damage that I speak of. You can see kind of where this varmint has tried to chew its poor way out. It got locked into one of the outbuildings by accident, and it was desperate to to leave, but it safely got out in the morning, but did quite a bit of damage overnight. So this, mainly I vacuumed up the little bits, and then I adhered the paper pulp over that jaggedy business without having to cut into the historic fabric. These sash are not particularly historic. They are from the 1930s, which made it a very good test case for this type of procedure. And I will end with this last picture. These were the two doors that I made for Mount Vernon that will eventually go on the east side opening for the house. We are waiting for stabilization of the frame and the house itself before I can install these. But that is all I have. Do we have questions?
Thank you very much, Amy. Thanks for a brilliant talk. That was amazing, and I think we move on to the question section now. I think you could have talked for a couple more hours, and I think we all would have loved listening. So if those of you who haven't joined before, if you pop your name in the chat, I'll ask you to unmute and ask your question. So Chester's already an expert at this. He's already put his name down. So over to you, Chester.
Hello, Amy. That was great. There's so much more that you could probably talk about in depth and different varieties. I have like 2 or 3 specific questions, but I've done a lot of historic preservation, I'll call it, rather than restoration, but because it's not necessarily putting it always back exactly as it was. I'm fascinated by your whole talk about dendrochronology and using the right, the same varieties of woods. In the beginning, when you were talking about working on the lighthouses, I wondered, since you were working up on a scaffold, do you bring any sort of a bench with you, your own bench to work at? Because it doesn't look like you'd have a shop at those lighthouses to work in.
No, there's no shop. And so my usual portable tool shop, or wood shop, would include my mortising bench, and then I would have my traveling tool case, which is kind of a it's a box that somebody built. It was for traveling. It holds basic stuff. I also have my saw quiver, which Jim alluded to earlier, and a variety of hand tools like pliers and such in another small bag.
Did you usually have an area in the lighthouse that they would specify and say, this is your area to work and you can keep your materials there while you were working?
So the lighthouse work, especially the bigger projects like Hasita Head and North Head, the lighthouse itself was shut, and a fence was put up around the lighthouse so that visitors would not get involved or get into your business. So I was able to, I would come and go from the lighthouses, whether or not I had a frame and sash ready to install, or if I had, a door ready or something, I would go out to the light for a period of, 2 to 3 days at a time. So I would store, my gear in the light. I felt that was more secure than actually going, keeping it in my truck at the hotels.
Right.
And,
Now,
it was fairly easy to set up.
When you get to Mount Vernon, I'm assuming that you have an actual shop, and you also talked about the lab. I was wondering, is that shop and lab separate from the actual building somewhere else on the property, on the grounds, that you can work out of? So that you're not in the building?
Yes. So at Mount Vernon, which is 400 acres, we have a carpenter's shop that we share with operations and maintenance. We do not have a dedicated preservation workshop. When we have big projects on the mansion, we set up a mobile workshop station right outside of the historic area. That's as close as we can get. It's probably, a 5-minute walk to back and forthing. So that is a challenge, especially if because they really don't want to see power tools in the historic area during visitor hours. And so you can use hand tools all to the day is long up there in the historic area with visitors. And so we kind of schedule the work. Like if you need to make a cut, you do it in the morning before we open. Or, we do all of our cutting on mini boards before we, get out to the historic area. The lab that I spoke of is kind of a lab workspace. We do have lab equipment, but not as much as you think. A couple of microscopes, a fume hood, some benches. That's essentially all we have.
So when you talk about matching species, is it, have you ever found at a certain point that you had to cross species because you couldn't necessarily get that specific species there where you are, or that was actually farmed from the land itself, and so the age of the wood that you're putting in is far enough different? Do you have any issues with actually being able to gather the materials to match a specific species? And I'm assuming in Mount Vernon that a lot of the archetype is Douglas fir.
So,
but I have no knowledge.
At Mount Vernon, we do not have a problem with the species. So at Mount Vernon, we have southern yellow pine, poplar, and white oak, sometimes walnut. Those are the species that we have. And there's usually sometimes cypress, but that's maybe added in the after the ladies took over in the 1860s. We start to see cypress. So getting the species isn't an issue. We do have a supplier of salvaged southern yellow pine that we can go to. He can provide you with whatever age you need, as long as you have the pocketbook for that. We recently had to make some new window boxes for the Washington bedchamber. So this is the room that he actually died in, and so I did the micro ID, and it turned out to be chestnut. Now, if any of you know, chestnut is very hard to find because of the blight that killed them all. And so finding salvaged chestnut was a little difficult. But in the end, our supplier did find enough chestnut to make the 2 window boxes for us. And so I would say that the advantage of it being Mount Vernon helped us in that endeavor. If this was in the Pacific Northwest and I could not get, say, Port Orford cedar for the lighthouse sills, which is a common thing that they would specify, I would ask the architect, can I substitute for Alaska yellow cedar, which is something I can get.
Now, I don't want to take up all the questions, so I'll come back after other people have asked questions. But one other thing I think is fairly important is how is your research and the information that you're gathering from your work preserved? Who maintains it? Does it go to the Smithsonian? Is there connection to the federal government that's preserving the work that you're producing? Not necessarily the physical work, but your research, your studies, your conclusions from these. Is there some tie-in to the Library of Congress or something to preserve your part of the history?
So George Washington's estate is privately owned. It's a private nonprofit owned by the Ladies Association since 1860. And as a result, we're not hooked into the federal government. And so my work, my documentation, my research on the sash and the doors here is housed here at the estate. Now, it is open to the public if you submit a request. The architectural collection and all of our research and documentation is available, but you must request it. It is not a place that you can come and just browse around or come in like a cold call. You'd have to make arrangements to do so. I hope in the future, now, I don't know if all of you know, I moved to Virginia during COVID, and so it's been hectic business. So I'm kind of just getting settled in here. My hope is to, write more, publish more, and do more public lectures. I will be presenting in Colonial Williamsburg at the 18th century, Working Wood in the 18th Century conference in January. So I hope to do, some more public engagement.
Well, let me thank you now from me, because I've already learned a lot, and I'll let some other people's questions come up and come back when they're done. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chester. Over to Matthias.
Yes, thank you very much, Amy. That was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Two questions. The first one, to what extent, you were talking just now about Colonial Williamsburg, to what extent does your job have a living history component? Are you supposed to dress in period clothing when you're working on in the historic areas? Are you expected to talk to visitors while you're working, that sort of thing?
So for my position at Mount Vernon, I am not a historical interpreter. So I don't have to dress, and I don't necessarily have to speak with the public unless I so desire. Sometimes if we're doing a lot of work in a location, they'll put an interpreter with us, that we give them talking points about what we're doing. And if there's very specific questions, we can stop and answer those specifically. And really, it's been, we had set up kind of a planing bench and a shave horse over the summer, and that's been great for visitor engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the carpenters that I'm in charge of enjoy that component of their work, where they get to engage and talk about what they do. So.
I was also wondering how you've already mentioned previous repairs, as it were, and the fact that you are now doing repairs and your predecessors have done repairs. How much of shall we call it a grandfather's axe syndrome is there to the property these days? That is to say, we changed the head 2 times and the helve 3 times, but it's still my grandfather's axe.
So you're alluding to?
Yeah, so how much is original structure, and how much is repaired and restored original structure?
We actually have quite a bit of original structure left, especially on the mansion. We have entire outbuildings that are pretty much untouched, with 90% 18th century material.
Yeah.
The siding is on the mansion itself. What was it? 80% of it is historic 18th century siding. For the sash themselves, I would say, well, it's I'm still kind of going through the research on those, because I've done the west side and the north and south ends, and next year we'll be doing the very large east side. And so just kind of, we have probably 60 to 70% 18th century sash left in the house. So we do have a large component of 18th century historic fabric. Some of the things that kind of do it in, or compromise it, surprisingly, we don't see a lot of decay on the siding itself.
Oh, right.
It has the sand and paint applied, which is a type of rustication, which is a very good coating. It's very durable, as long as you maintain it. So I think the combination of very resin filled southern yellow pine and this sand and paint coating has really preserved a lot of that siding, and we don't usually see a lot of decay when we're doing an elevation on the mansion. I can only think of maybe 1 to 2 boards in the 3 sides we've done that have had decay in them. So it's surprising how much is there, really. And that's great, and it does add a bit of pressure to my work.
I can imagine.
So, hence why we're kind of doing these sort of innovative treatments with alternative materials that would save more historic fabric.
Absolutely. Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I did not mean the question in a disrespectful manner.
Oh no, not at all.
You didn't mean to put it in. It was pure curiosity.
Yeah. We get the question a lot. So I think the glass or the glazing is the one material that's really suffered the most over time, as you would expect. We have very few panes of crown glass left, and we treat them as if they were gold. Those panes.
So, I mean, you did say it's been going the current concern has been going since the 1860s. So has it been properly sensitively done all the time?
I would say yes and no. It was very when the ladies purchased it and took over its stewardship. It was in a sorry state. They had to support the piazza with ship masts. We have a photo of these giant ship masts trying to support the piazza. The front doors were removed. There's X bracing that you can see on the interior. So there was some serious structural issues that they had to deal with. And this was not an easy time to be taking on such a project. This is 1860. This is during the Civil War. There's battles raging around. So I would imagine it took many years before it was stable.
Anyway, I would take up more of the question time, but thank you very, very much.
Yes, excellent.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Over to Josh.
Hi, Josh.
I thought I had a basic question, but from what you just said about glazing, maybe it's a more complicated one than I thought. How do you source the glass? Because that seems like if you have a broken window, what do you?
Right. So we do not bring in crown glass. I think you can still get it in England. Maybe Richard might be able to tell if you can still get crown glass in England. So we use a modern replicated type of cylinder glass called Bentheim. It's a restoration type of glass. It is made in a traditional cylinder glass way. And so you do get the undulations and the distortion and the inclusions that you would see in a cylinder glass. I would love to bring in crown glass. It's a little, from the pieces that I've worked with that we have currently, crown glass is a very different beast than anything you've ever seen. Its thickness varies greatly over a very small distance. Like you can have a pane about this big where it's super thin and super thick on one side. And so I don't know how that would go with cutting and working with it. It's very intriguing. The pieces we have are beautiful blue-green. We believe it to be Radcliffe glass out of London. And to even envision all of the panes blue-green would have been an amazing sight to see, because now we have one or two pieces that are blue-green, but the rest of it's clear. And so to even just imagine it all blue-green would be just spectacular.
When you were working on the West Coast, that was more.
That's cylinder glass. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and when I was working in the West, I made a policy of using modern float glass, which is just modern glass you can get at Home Depot or your box store or whatever, instead of a restoration glass, because I did not want to fool anyone as to what's really going on. I didn't want to put in a salvage piece of old glass in a pane when that piece of glass did not originally get there. It wasn't, I don't want anyone thinking in the future that, oh, this is an old piece of glass. Really, this might be an older piece of glass, but it's been reused. And so if the architect does specify salvage cylinder glass, I etch the date in the corner of the glass pane so that there is no confusion. Here at Mount Vernon, we do etch dates in the glass when we have to do a replacement of some kind.
So a homeowner living in I have an 1890s house, and I have this nightmare that one of the wavier windows will get broken, and then it'll be replaced by something, and it'll bug me. It sounds like it's actually not that big of a deal to find.
No, you can get, so when I lived in Oregon, my daughter broke my large picture window. Listening to Mary Poppins with the rocking chair, she backed into the glass and cracked it. This is a 4-foot by 5-foot piece of wavy glass. I had to hunt around for a salvage piece that was big enough for me to cut to make that. But I put that in, etched a little date in, and I'm cool with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Josh. Over to Biggles.
Oh God.
Absolutely. You get the Biggles bit. This refers, guys, to our boot fair trips around with me and Ivan the Terrible, and I was Biggles and he was the Red Baron, and Amy was our not sure, adjudicator. I'm not referee. Yeah, something like that. They were great times, those mornings of very early mornings looking for tools, and I think you went back with quite a lot. My question, actually, because I thought, you know what, I'm never going to have to ask her a question because I know her so well and she tells me everything. But the one question that came up from something which intrigued me was your papier-mâché. Now, you mentioned that obviously paper, and I presume you don't use Chronicles from 1840, but do you? What is the glue that you use? What consists?
What's the binder?
Yeah.
So I make a mold out of silicone.
Yep.
And then I'll put in my paper pulp with that's been mixed with water, makes a kind of a slurry, and I'll put it in there, and then I'll let it dry in there. And then that one piece that you saw kind of just, placed upon the piece of wood, that's how it comes out of the mold. It actually stays together fairly well for just being water and paper. And at that point, I coat it with B72. Okay. B72 is a butyl resin that's dissolved in a solvent, either acetone or methane, i.e. ethyl alcohol. And it dissolves down into a liquid. You can adjust the percentage to make it either thick or thin or somewhere in between. And then I coat that with a brush just to make it stable enough for me to pick it up and place it into position. And then I use a thicker B72, like a 30%. And then I will adhere it with that and let that sit. It takes overnight. This process is not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of steps, and the glue its open time is a long time. Like you can mess it up and put it back together again many times over. So it does take a very long time to actually set up, because that solvent has to evaporate off of there, and then you're just left with the butyl resin.
Yeah, my Gabriel jointer, which you may recall, looks like it suffered from acne for most of its life. In the end, I discovered B72, and that's probably about 40% B72 inside the.
You can tint it. You can color that.
It was actually used to inject into the all of the worm and also the wet rot, because it had been lying on its side on a shelf, and there was capillary water ingression between the shelf and the plane. So it kind of like, I call it acne, plain acne, but and particularly the handle was completely almost skeletal. But I wanted to preserve the handle, which I then used for other patterns. But yeah, Yannick, when he did the talk for us, he explained, because I asked him because of being synthetic, I thought he was talking about reversibility as well and prevention, conservation. And I asked him that the very question: does B72 have a natural equivalent? And he said no, you use that. That's what we use. It's reversible. So
yeah,
that
is what we use.
Oh,
and we do use it as a consolidant as well. At 10%, that's how we consolidate, friable, decayed areas.
Yeah, I'm aware of its complexity in working it, and also the consistency. You can change it. I think I use acetone as a solvent, and then inject it and just wait forever. When it eventually. But what I did is, just to conclude this comment, was I left the mix in a glass flask, and then just kept looking at that.
Yeah, to see when the solvent had dissolved
when
out.
it kicked off. Yeah, and it goes back to almost the crystalline structure that it starts out at. Excellent. Thank you very much once again for your talk, and I'll pass on to the next person. Thanks.
Yeah, and its heat transfer is high, so it won't. If it gets hot from the sun, it will not, get soft.
Yeah, good stuff. Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jim. Well, I've decided to squeeze in a question here myself.
Okay.
So you're talking about using old glass, and I was wondering, with the old glass, actually cutting the glass, is it any different to cutting modern glass?
It can be a little unpredictable. So if I'm getting salvage glass, say from someone's put their windows in the bin and I've retrieved them, that glass, which is period salvaged cylinder glass, meaning it's manufactured in the late 19th century and has been in a building for a long time. That behaves a little differently than this reproduction glass that I use at Mount Vernon. The reproduction glass at Mount Vernon behaves a little bit more like modern glass. I do clean it. I want to clean both sides very well before I cut. And that goes very specifically for if you have salvage pieces that are of old glass, you want to make sure that both sides are very clean before you start. If you hit an occlusion, I don't know if you've cut glass, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I've cut glass for years.
Yeah. Okay. If you hit an occlusion and your cutter goes off, then sometimes there's no going back from that. So it is, it takes a little bit of experience with it. I would say, start, if you're wanting to get into cutting old glass, to start out with some scraps. Sometimes it's just about the mojo, like things are flowing really good that day and glass seems to cut like a dream. Other days it's like you're off to a bad start from the get-go and it's just best to I'm going to step away for a second and take a breath. And so sometimes it's just kind of the luck of the piece with that
Okay.
stuff.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
I believe the next question is over to Paul. Now I have to find him, see which name he's come under. There we go. There we go, Paul.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for your absolutely fabulous talk. Very enjoyable and informative. How do you actually so you're making molding planes to match, but how do you actually measure the profile? Do you just use like profile gauges or?
So what I do, I found that profile gauges, the needles are too big. It's too big to get in there. And so what I do is I make cardboard templates. So I'll make a cardboard template of that profile, and that's what I'll use to build my plane. If I'm working from architectural drawings, they'll usually have a drawing of the profile, which I can use. Like the work at Colonial Williamsburg, I'm building a 7-foot diameter circular sash for the conference, and we were not able to actually physically look at the original sash, and so we do have an architectural drawing, which is how I'm building the plane from that. I do have a copy of the profile on the drawing, so I'll either make a template, which I like to do better because it's actual, I can see the actual profile, or I'll use an architectural drawing, which is supplied to me.
So the last photo that you showed,
Mhm.
you look to have a very large wood jointer. Do you use mostly wood planes rather than?
Yes, I do. If anyone knows me, you know that I have a strong dislike to Stanley planes. The wood planes are easy to set, like the wedge. You tap the iron, set the wedge, you're ready to go. There's not a lot of bits and bobs that I gotta turn the wheel and whatnot and this and that. It just, for me, it cuts down on the time it takes to set it up, and I can be really efficient with those wooden planes. So I am almost exclusively wooden planes. I do have metal shoulder planes that I've gotten from Bill and Sarah. And I have one of his miter planes. So I do have a small little bit of metal plane.
But very special metal plane.
That's right. They have to be very special for me to bite off on a. Plus, that shop that I showed you, the little garage, that was unheated. And if anyone knows Pacific Northwest winters, it's very damp and cold. Although you all in the UK know exactly what I'm talking about. Damp and cold, no heat. Picking up a metal plane was like torture for my hands. So the wood planes, they feel great. They have a lot of history. You can see like where the hands go, and it's just beautiful.
And they just slide straight over the wood.
I know, it's like magic. It's
Yeah, I've got a lot of that one. I do have a real soft spot for wood planes.
Yeah. Plus I can make wooden planes. It's hard, although I'm not Jim, I cannot make metal planes. I'm not even going to go down that road, Jim.
I'm sure you would be able to with your skills, but it's
not all that equipment. I don't have the Holoplatzer, lathe, and the.
Have you seen what Bill uses?
Ooh, Bill? Yeah, I have seen that. I don't know.
I think it's perfect timing to ask Anton to if he's around to actually pronounce it properly.
What's it called?
Holtzapfel. Anton says it perfectly.
Where's Anton?
He's not
I wanted
here.
to come visit Anton for Krampus, but the COVID's got it closed. So.
I'm here. Yeah, it's Holzapfel.
What's it called? Holzapfel?
Holzapfel.
Oof.
It's basically it means crab apple.
Crab apple?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
It's less exotic, isn't it? Crab apple.
Wow.
No, not really. They grow everywhere here.
Do they?
Yeah.
So all those planes and tools are named after a crab apple? Well, I'm gonna
No.
call Jim's lathe the crabapple plane then, or lathe then.
No, that's the guy's. It's the guy's like. It's like Smithy here. It's called Smith, but he doesn't go out to the blacksmith shop every day. But he's named after it. So Holtzapfel was
I'm
crab apple.
Smithies as well.
Pardon?
Not Smithy.
Smithy. Yeah.
Mm.
Anyway, that you don't need you do need you do really need even a treadle lathe to make the lever.
Yeah, that's
But
what
you
I
could
thought, Jim.
but you
That's
could
what
but
I
you could
thought.
have you could have made a wedge. You didn't have to make a turned lever cap. So I'm still expecting to see you
Oh God.
do a Bill Carter on us one day. I'm sure you absolutely. Shrenik says or Smithy says you've definitely got the capability to do it. So
Well,
tell us about Peacock.
the peacock. Oh yeah, I have it right here actually. There
Oh,
it
look
is.
at this boxwood, isn't it?
Boxwood peacock. So I
Ooh,
call it the
that's a lovely-
peacock because can you all see that profile on that bad boy? There it is in the dark. So I grew up on a farm with my grandmother. Both my parents worked, and she had peacocks. And being on a farm, you quickly learn that animals they would produce something that you would use. Wool, meat, eggs, etc. But she'd have these peacocks around and they make a horrible racket. And I'd say, Grandma, why do you keep these peacocks around? Because we don't do anything with them. We don't eat them. We don't use their eggs or anything. Well, they sure are pretty to have around. So I named this contraption the peacock because it nearly became something beautiful to hang around. So I was working at North Head Lighthouse, and the molding for the casements, which are the trim that goes around the windows, doors, everything, was a very complicated beaded piece of trim that was probably 7 inches wide. It was a mirror image of itself, and so it was very Victorian. So I had to run these, the profile this side, flip the board, and run the profile that way. So I looked in my David Russell book, and I was like, I think I can make this by hand. I want to make this by hand. I don't want to go to the shop for this. And so I looked in the David Russell book and I saw this really wide molding plane that looked similar to this right here. No fence on that bad boy. I was like, okay, they did it back then, so I'm going to do it too. So I called Jim. I was like, I need to make this really wide plane. And I don't have any beach. So I went to the wood shop and they had these quarter sections of boxwood. And I called Jim. I was like, Jim, do you think this will work? It's like, yeah, give it a go. So I built this plane. It is beautiful. I have to tell you, I put a little bead on that edge there. Nice swooping wedge. It's like, yeah, look at that big iron on that bad boy. And I was like, oh, it's beautiful. Look at that. And so I fawned over it for a couple weeks, and then it came time to run 200 lineal feet of siding or trim work with it. But first of all, I had to get approval from the project manager. I had to submit samples for him to say, okay, go. So I started. Now, if anyone knows, what this doesn't have is a fence. So my first go at this, I was skateboarding down that wood. It was like, woo, 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 like I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And so I took a break. I knew that was not going to work. And I called Jim. Like, Jim, this is not going to work. What the hell am I going to do? And then I called Richard. And I said, Richard, this is not working. I saw this plane in David Russell and I need to make this molding. What should I do? And Richard chimes in and says, girl, that plane is for the very last run of your trim. that is not to go and do right off the bat. It's like, oh, okay. So I drew out the profile. I figured out where I needed to put dados, rabbits, chamfers. It ended up I needed 7 planes before I used this big bad dog right here. So 3 plows to set the depths for that right there and that right there, and I think up here a chamfer at the end, and then there was this right here that had to be hogged out. There was a rebate that had to be hogged out, and then a little work here, and then I could run this bad boy. And so I would not have been able to do it without Richard and Jim.
Yeah, but just imagine. I mean, people think when they get all these complex molding planes at boot fairs and stuff, and they think that they can. I don't think as many people realize that, like Richard said, they are the finishing planes, and so therefore, But that's why in your standard toolkit you have all of your hollows and rounds, all of your rebates, all of that, and your quirks and so on that you can do. So, but I remember that vividly, and I remember you getting the boxwood and going, "Why this stuff is great." So, it's solid. I mean, that's a unique plane now, isn't it, Amy? I mean,
it is, and to this day, the project manager thinks I had a shop run it.
So there you go. The proof that you can do it by
and
hand.
then one other little nugget is I ran 200 lineal feet in 2 days, and I walked 3 miles in front of my bench. So when people tell you, oh, hand tools take forever, you can't, it just takes forever to do, it's so much faster with power. I'm living proof that that's bullshit.
And
Sorry.
there's no
It's just a family show.
Yeah, no, don't worry about it.
I'm terrible.
But also 2 things. One is it doesn't have any chatter marks, and 2, because your brilliant playmaking, and 2, it has no burn marks. And can you imagine a router cutter cutting that profile in that width, which would have to have been a spindle molder set up, a custom spindle made for it, etc., etc. And it just, it's not just the time, it's they would have had to have made a custom setup for that, and it would have absolutely without question caused burning on the wood, especially the woods you were using, which would have been sap, a lot of sap in them. So brilliant. But that's a great story. Thanks for bringing that up.
I think I'll never forget it.
Thanks, Amy. Can you hold up the plane for a second again? Because I realized that I'd spotlighted the other 2 at the same time.
So that's the profile right there.
Amazing.
Okay, we'll move over to Rusty, who's our last question for tonight.
Okay.
Hey, Amy, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing pretty
congratulations on the old Carpenters Without Borders.
Thank you. I just got back from England on Sunday.
Yeah, I saw all your swag and your.
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing trip. Hey, I want to ask you about your work outside of Mount Vernon. So I've been following you on social media for a while, and there were 2 things that you mentioned that kind of I wanted more information on. So one is sometimes you want to just go home and build a staircase.
Yeah,
that's one. And the other one, black snakes in the walls.
Oh yeah, black snakes.
Yeah,
you love the black snakes here. So when I moved to Virginia, it's expensive, as you can imagine, being near DC and all that. And Mount Vernon, though it has its pluses, the pay is not as good as when I was a contractor. And so finding a historic house to live in with a shop and everything seemed daunting in 2019. And I ran across a program here in Fairfax County where they, it's called the Resident Curatorship, where you essentially are a curator for a historic house for Fairfax County in Virginia. and they have properties, parkland really, that have a historic home on it. And so they would like to, they don't want to maintain all that. They're trying to bring in professionals that know what they're doing to restore these houses and kind of be a steward for them. And so they have started a program that's modeled after the Maryland State Park resident curatorship program, which has been going for over 20 years. And so I was very excited that Fairfax County had one. And at the time, we went out to see a property and they were like, oh, there's one just down the road. And so we went to look at it and we fell immediately in love with it. And it has a great story. I am whenever I have a free moment, planning to set up a website for it. It's got a very great story behind it. And so we are now resident curators for a historic home here in Fairfax County, which is only about 8 miles from work, which is fantastic because a lot of people drive over an hour to get to work. But it does, in exchange for rent, you essentially restore it and you go through their list of things that need to be done, from new roof, structural issues, window restoration, you name it, they have it as far as issues. And so when I said that about, I just want to go home and build a stair, sometimes I'm at Mount Vernon, projects take a long time, which rightly so, as it's the first president's house and we're very careful. And so, sometimes I just want to come home and just build without hesitation or, a lot of, input. I just want to build a stair. So this house does provide that outlet. It also comes with a very large shop, which has been fantastic. It's a little bit in disarray. You've seen my posts about trying to get it back up to speed. So that is what I'm referring to when I say, I want to just go home and build a stair. What was your second part of the question?
So the black snakes in the walls.
Oh yeah. So black snakes are prevalent here. We have them all over. They are harmless reptiles. They eat the mice, which is great because then we don't have to set traps, and then there's all that and this and that. They do come into the house, up in the walls and such, and so you got to be wary. If you're going to open a wall or have something open for a while, you need to take precautions. Otherwise, you're going to have a snake on your dining room table. They're very harmless. They do move fast, so you kind of have to be quick about it, but they are benign. I like them. I'm a snake person, and I like that they keep the mice under control. And we do get them at the estate.
I have a phobia of snakes, so
Oh, no.
that would be a very different response. Yeah, but was any part of the house livable when you moved in?
Somewhat. It was a archaeological field station, so there was, the water ran. I had no hot water for 3 months. What else? The roof was intact. The heat worked. I had no washer and dryer for another 6 months. So for the first couple of months, I was just here by myself, and I would heat the water on the stove. Thank God we had a gas stove, so it would work if the power's out, because we do get wicked storms here. And I would do my laundry in the sink and hang it outside on my truck because we had no line. So some of the houses are very, pretty rough and tumble. So you have to go into it with your eyes open. These are not houses that you would normally see a realtor trying to sell you.
The
They've
snakes
had
are
a
optional.
variety of issues, and this house in particular hadn't been occupied for 9 years before we arrived here. Hence why there was no hot water and other amenities.
So not only you do a period appropriate work, you also live a period appropriate life.
Yes. Well, yes. We do have a washer now, and we do have hot water, and so we do have some modern conveniences.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you, Amy. I'm still
All right,
hoping to come and visit you soon.
Yeah, please do. Any of you, please drop me a line if you're ever in the neighborhood, and I can get you a back tour of Mount Vernon.
Thank you.
Lots to see. Okay.
Well, thank you, everyone. I don't know if Amy and Rusty are still spotlighted. Scott, if you could unspotlight them. Wonderfully, my laptop battery's just died. So I'm joining from my phone to, as Jeffrey tonight, to raise a toast to Amy and Rusty, and sorry, not to Rusty as well, but well, to Amy.
Three cheers to the wind.
And thank you to Jim as well for inviting Amy to do this talk. Wonderful talk. Thank you. Cheers to the bench.
Thank you all.
Excellent.
Amy and the bench. Thank you, Amy. That was brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you.